Welcome to the Own It Powercast, the place to be when you get serious about making big changes and accelerating growth in your life and in your relationships. Finally create the life you've always wanted, living life on your own terms. Learn how to take your fear and turn it into powerful choices that will create sustained change. Now your host, Mary Baker.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Own It Powercast, the place to come to get what you need to move yourself forward. Hey, it's Mary Baker and welcome to episode 277. Wait, am I the problem? The boundary issues we don't see in ourselves. Well, hi and welcome back to this month, which is all about being and connecting in ways that are good for us and healthy for our relationships too. We're going to continue our focus on what healthy boundaries really look like in our behavior and our communication. In other words, what we do and what we don't do in our relationships. So this week, we're going to continue our focus on what healthy boundaries really look like and trying to focus on the more subtle stuff this month instead of the obvious ones that we kind of all know. Because you know this if you've been working on yourself. It's the stuff you don't see that gets in the way of your life. And that's why I think it's important to point these things out and to tackle them. If you find, as you're listening today, that you need more help with this, make sure you sign up for one of the courses or a power hour with me. I have a few openings for February, but they're going fast. So look in the show notes. All the links are there for everything that you need. There's a free mini course on boundaries. There's a 3-part masterclass on how you lost your voice and a full course, which is lovely and has everything in it that you need, including the group coaching and one-on-one support from me. So if you want to know more about those, look in the show notes or reach out. I can answer any questions that you have. So have you ever found yourself saying yes before you even think about whether you want to? Or have you felt guilty lately just for setting a simple boundary? Maybe you go out of your way to keep the peace. You make sure no one's upset, or you find yourself softening your words so you don't ruffle any feathers. And you may have been doing this for a long time and you're just now noticing, and that's normal too. If any of that sounds familiar, you might be stuck in a pattern we call fawning. And it's one of the limbic system responses like fight or flight or freeze. And it's where people pleasing takes over and your own needs, your own time and energy can get pushed to the side. So in this episode, we're going to unpack the sneaky ways that I think fawning shows up in our daily lives, especially in how we manage our time, handle communication, and show up in our relationships. And these are the boundary issues we don't always see in ourselves. The ones that keep us overcommitting, over-apologizing, and feeling exhausted. But I think the good news is that once you start spotting these patterns, you can start to make some real shifts. It's all changeable, guys. So let's get into it. Okay, so here are some that often fly under the radar. First, we're going to look at time management and self-discipline issues. So the first one is not setting realistic limits on our own time, which means saying yes to too much and then, of course, feeling overwhelmed. I also think it means not taking responsibility for even if you have any business saying yes. Like, why are you saying yes? And what reality is that based on? Okay. So just not being realistic, not doing the boundary work around time and energy. Another way this can happen is allowing distractions like texts and emails and social media to dictate our focus rather than setting intentional work times. So if we're not intentional about it, you know what happens. All of a sudden an hour has gone by and you've just been doom scrolling. We can overpromise and underdeliver. Boy, can this be a problem in relationships. I work with this all the time. Well-meaning, but we agree to things that we can't reasonably follow through on because a lot of times we're saying yes out of guilt or people-pleasing. We're not saying yes because we're pretty sure we can make that happen and we know why we can make that happen. So then what happens is you get to the moment, you got too many things on your plate and you can't follow through. You don't feel good about yourself, and other people get frustrated with you because they want to trust you. Not prioritizing rest and self care is another one. So we can, and I know this sounds kind of harsh, but we can act as if burnout is a badge of honor instead of a sign of poor boundaries with ourselves. Now, it's one thing to have an acute crisis that comes at you didn't plan for. I'm not speaking to those, I'm speaking to chronic patterns of behavior. Like it's often that you don't prioritize your rest and your self care. And then here's a famous one, procrastination as avoidance. That's when we are delaying things we know we need to do because we're afraid of failure, we're afraid of discomfort or confrontation. We might just be afraid of change. Treating emergencies as the norm is another one. So, letting other people's poor planning or their constant crises dictate our schedule. And I want you to think about that for a moment. Does that happen for you because of people in your life that you love and care about can't get it together? So you often have to drop what you're doing or change your weekend plans to rescue. So those are some ways that we struggle with time management and self-discipline. Now, I talked a little bit last week about communication, but I want to get into it again today. Boundaries and communication in relationships. When we interrupt, or maybe we dominate a conversation, we do the data dump, and we may not even notice when we're speaking over others or that we're failing to listen actively because our anxiety's in the way. That's what's going on. We're not trying to be rude. It's just happening. Maybe we overshare as a coping mechanism. That's something we don't talk about enough. Did you know that sharing too much too soon with the wrong people is really looking for validation instead of true connection? Okay, true connection is with people that you already know and they know you. Asking intrusive questions. We might think we're just being curious, but maybe we're actually stepping over others' privacy boundaries. You got to have to do case by case with that, and because every situation is different. But I want you to think for a moment, how does it feel when people do that with you? And just consider that the next time you ask questions about things that they may not be ready to answer. Here's one. The passive aggressive or indirect communication, where we are hinting at what we need instead of clearly stating it. What's an example of that? Oh, I just can't get anyone to help me this weekend. As opposed to, hey, do you think you can help me this weekend? All right. So it's playing the victim so other people come and rescue us instead of asking directly and being vulnerable and risking rejection. Another boundary blur is taking on other people's emotional burdens. Maybe trying to fix their problems instead of letting them sit in their own stuff for a bit. Again, every situation is different. But if someone needs to learn a lesson and you love them enough to allow them to do it, remember the difference between hurt and harm. It may hurt their feelings. It may suck. They won't like it. We don't like it when we sit in our stuff, but you're not harming them. Ooh, expecting mind reading. Do you ever feel hurt when other people don't know what you need, but you never really actually communicated it, but you're still pissed they didn't anticipate? There's a lot of controversy around this. Some people say, well, they've known me for years, Mary. Why don't they know that? I'm like, yeah, there's some truth to that. But the point is we're afraid to ask for what we need because, again, we could put ourselves out there and get rejected or worse, let down. Then you might have to face the reality that they don't want to. They're not interested in meeting your need. So rather than take that risk and be vulnerable or be shamed, we want people to mind read. And we try to mind read for them. How well do you hear a no? Struggling to receive a no well, pushing back when someone sets a boundary instead of coming to acceptance around it and showing respect for it. That's hard. That's hard when the stakes are high, when you had your heart set on something, when it really feels like a rejection. It takes a lot of emotional maturity to handle that well. What about respecting other people's space and energy? Showing up unannounced. That can be one that people fight about. Or maybe overstaying. So like not noticing when our presence might be a drain on someone else's time or energy, not asking, not saying, hey, is this a good time? It was on my way home, but I don't need to stay. And this goes hand in hand with assuming people have time for us. Dropping in on others emotionally or physically without checking if they're even in a headspace. And we often forget to ask. But boy, isn't it nice when someone asks us that question, like, hey, is now a good time? Is this a good day? I have some stuff I need to dump. Are you up for that? Here's one. Being late or unreliable. And again, usually because of all the stuff I mentioned already, we don't have great boundaries around our time. We're trying to do too much. We're trying to rescue too much. So we end up running late or not being able to follow through. And what we don't recognize is how our lack of time management affects others. It's almost like disrespectful of what about their choices for today? So if I show up late, maybe I'm holding them up, right? So I'm not thinking about what do they have going on. And the other thing too is it erodes trust and creates anxiety and resentment. It's kind of hard to feel respected in a relationship if you are chronically late or unreliable. Because no matter how much they love you, how can they respect you or really have faith in you? What about not respecting other people's off time? Just like assuming they're available when we need them, instead of maybe recognizing their personal boundaries. Now, footnote, the healthy people will tell you that. They'll say, you know what? I don't really pick up my phone on Sundays. I kind of take a break. Or I go to bed at 10. So if you call me after 10, unless it's an emergency, I'm not going to pick it up. It's not about you. They're just trying to take care of themselves. More invisible, I think, are the emotional and energetic boundaries. What about letting other people's moods dictate ours? Because usually it's because they can't handle their own emotions. So we take on their stress, their anxiety, their negativity, instead of really focusing on managing our own emotional state. That may include setting a boundary like, hey, I can't do this anymore. You've been griping for an hour and we've talked about this 3 times already. I need a break. I'm going to go in the other room. Okay. But that's going to be hard if you struggle with the next one, which is feeling responsible for making everybody comfortable, right? So you're over accommodating because you're trying to avoid conflict or tension because your fear is that you can't handle that or you don't know how to handle that. This next one is extremely common and one that if you're working on boundaries and if you're a giver and a doer, this is going to be a struggle, but it'll get better as you go. Being too available. So then that means feeling guilty when we're not always accessible, even when we need space, even when we told them, hey, I'm going to be out for a couple of hours, or I'm going to go for a walk, or I'm going to go get some quiet time, or I'm going to go take a nap. And they, for whatever reasons, ignore that, right? And they text you, or they call you, or they knock on your door. Remember detachment. Just because they need you right now or want you right now, rather, doesn't mean you're a bad person for taking a break and not being available. Pull those things apart. So here are some other ways that we can be compliant, we can fawn, we can abandon ourselves. And until we really start looking at these and getting really, in a loving way, honest with ourselves, then we'll continue the patterns and you don't have to. This is stuff you can work on, you can change with love and support and coaching. Hard to change this stuff just by yourself. So if you're really looking to work on some of these, get some support. So always being the go-to person for the last minute help. Being so reliable and so accessible, like we talked about a few moments ago, where other people assume we're going to accommodate them because we always have in the past. So that's on us, right? It's on us not having set any boundaries perhaps in the past. So they assume we're going to drop what we have going on and gladly help. Now, of course, again, sometimes that's appropriate if it's a crisis or if it's a one off. I'm not talking about that. You people know who you are. You're very responsible, you're very reliable, but maybe you don't say no. What about feeling paralyzed by decision making? Maybe worrying too much about what other people think. So we delay our choices or we let other people decide for us. We wait to see what they think. Again, this is so subtle, we may not even realize we're doing it. Over explaining is one we don't talk about enough, and that is that subconscious need to justify our choices, our emotions about something, or even our boundaries so that other people don't get upset. So we'll go on and on as to why we came to this decision because we're afraid. We don't want them to get upset. We don't want tension. The other thing we do is we apologize too much. So we're saying sorry for things that don't really require an apology. And when people start doing the boundary work, they have to muddle through this maze of, okay, what should I feel bad for? What shouldn't I? Because when you apologize for things that don't require an apology, like let's say you got to go, you don't say, I'm so sorry, I have to leave. But if you find yourself doing that, what you're doing is you're softening potential tension. You're trying to ward that off. You're trying to control that outcome. Another way we do that is agreeing with people even when we don't. So we nod our head and we go along and say, yeah, totally. Because we're just trying to avoid conflict or their disapproval. So if we struggle with self-esteem and we're secretly approval seeking, we're going to do that. Another thing that we do is we don't hold people accountable. We let things slide. The lateness, the broken promises, the disrespect. Because addressing them feels scary because, yes, it's confrontational. And I think deep down we know kind of how that's going to go. We will also do this by laughing off hurtful comments, like we'll brush off the passive aggressive or the dismissive or rude remarks as if they don't bother us, even though it may have felt shaming, condescending, disrespectful, diminishing. We'll laugh it off as a defense and to diffuse any possible tension. What about over helping or fixing others? Jumping in to solve problems without even being asked. Because we believe deep down that our value comes from being useful. Now, again, we may not be aware of that belief. And if someone points that out to us, we're going to probably immediately dismiss it and say, that's not true. But I want you to really think about that. Hand in hand with this one is assuming others need rescuing. We believe it's our job to shield people from discomfort, when in reality, we're just taking on responsibilities that aren't ours and we're not doing them any favors. We've talked about that here often. We don't rescue others, we rescue ourselves from the reality that might be taking place that we can't handle. That's also why we give advice when it's not wanted. We think we need to jump in and offer solutions instead of just listening and allowing them to come to their own solutions. It's different if they turn to you and say, what do you think? Can you help me? That's different. What about feeling like we have to be easygoing all the time? Here's more fawning, like not allowing ourselves to have preferences, needs, or strong opinions. I want you to think about that. I have people argue for this with me, but shouldn't I be easygoing, Mary? Life is short and all the things. And I say, that's great and good for you as long as you are also setting boundaries the other half of the week. Be as easygoing as you want. But if you are never voicing what you think and feel and need, you're not being honest because it's just not realistic. Maybe we silence ourselves when we're hurt. So that means choosing not to speak up when someone hurts or disrespects us because we don't want to make waves. Here's one, letting guilt override our gut feelings. ignoring that internal discomfort because we feel bad putting our own needs first. But then we kick ourselves later, don't we? Because we didn't follow our gut. Another way we can fawn and not have boundaries is feeling really, really anxious when someone is upset with us. Not that that's fun, right? But I mean, then bending over backwards to fix it, even when we didn't do anything wrong. I want you to give that some thought this week and see if you do that. Tolerating unhealthy behavior for the sake of peace. Guys, that's why they call it peace at any price, because the price is often high if done over time. So we make excuses for other people instead of holding them accountable. Oh, they didn't mean it. Oh, they just had a bad day. And that's okay if it was really out of character for that person, right? But what if it isn't? And you continue making excuses because you're embarrassed. Maybe that's your partner, your son, your brother, your boss. And finally, needing constant reassurance. So without realizing it, we might be seeking lots of validation from others because we've lost touch with our own self-trust, which is why I talk about self-trust so much here on the show. And the way to build that self-trust or build it back is to start breaking free from all these fawning behaviors and having weak boundaries. Okay. You recognize some of these patterns. You want to think about taking that first step to shifting out of the fawning tendencies because you deserve to reclaim your time and your energy, and I would dare say your self-respect. Like, I don't think we can do all the stuff I've been talking about today and really have great respect for ourselves. I just don't think that's possible. Conversely, when we start changing these things, yes, it might feel scary as hell, and you're going to like yourself more and you're going to trust yourself more. So, what are some things you can start doing or imagine doing? Like, guys, if these seem too terrifying, just write them down, think about it, and just make them aspirations, right? First one is try to pause before saying yes and ask yourself, do I actually want to do this? Do I have time to do this? Was I planning on doing this? What's going to happen if I do this? Like, what are the consequences of me doing this? Well, I'm not going to get my own stuff done tonight, for example. So do this before you commit. Another thing is practice sitting with your discomfort instead of avoiding it. So start small because it can feel overwhelming, but practice tolerating the small tension of maybe saying no to something small, setting a limit with yourself, or maybe gently disagreeing with someone. And don't run from it. Don't backpedal it. Don't say, oh, never mind. It's fine. I'll go with you. If you end up doing that, forgive yourself and do better tomorrow. Okay. Because the process is messy. Like, we're going to keep screwing this up, but then screwing it up feels more and more uncomfortable. We want to do healthier. So don't think you're failing if you're screwing up. All that matters is your awareness and your commitment. Try to practice not over-explaining. So think about what you want to respond with and shrink it in your head. Take that 2-paragraph summary and shrink it down to 2 sentences. So instead of explaining 52 reasons why you can't go tomorrow, you just say, I'm so sorry, I can't make it. You just say, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to make it tomorrow. Maybe next time. Another thing is I want you to practice noticing the guilt, but don't obey it. So notice it, but don't obey it. Guilt isn't always a signal we're doing something wrong. Sometimes it's just old programming, all that unearned guilt that we talk about here a lot. You have to prove to me that you've earned it, right? Before you're allowed to feel guilty about it. So really look at that. I want you to unpack the guilt. Did I do anything wrong? Did I knowingly do anything wrong? Why or why not? And it's always helpful to get other healthy people's opinions before you decide. And then practice small moments of assertion, right? That means just expressing a preference, maybe declining something minor, or take up space in a conversation. Move towards someone, ask them how they're doing today. Every time we move towards, we empower ourselves. we feel more confident. And then finally, try to recognize when you're trying to control how others feel, especially if you're getting ready to set a boundary or disappoint them or be different or whatever. Remember, it's not your job to make everyone comfortable at your own expense. And that's what we're talking about today, your own expense. Most of us learned fawning behaviors early on as a way to keep the peace, a way to be liked, or gosh, just to stay safe in relationships, even emotionally safe. But when we bring this into adulthood unchecked, I think it helps keep us small, resentful, and exhausted. And you deserve better. You have the right to be more honest with yourself and others, and to have relationships with people who can handle that. Because, guys, the people who can handle that and do the same in return are the ones that are going to offer you real connection and real friendship and real love and real support. If not, then it's conditional and it's not healthy. So today we talked about how many of us think of boundaries as something we set with other people. But really, it's more about the boundaries we fail to set with ourselves. So we talked about the often missed ways we mismanage our time, we overaccommodate, and we fall into the patterns of fawning where people-pleasing overrides our own needs. These habits can look like overcommitting, struggling to say no, avoiding conflict, or just compulsively putting other people's comfort ahead of our own well-being. And while they might seem harmless in and of themselves or harmless on the surface, they slowly chip away at our confidence, our energy, and our self-trust. If you ever felt guilty for setting boundaries, caught yourself over-explaining decisions, or found it hard to stop people-pleasing, these are some things that might be helpful to look at. And then we talked about ways you can practice little by little, incrementally, taking care of yourself, taking up space, and honoring what you need. Thank you for joining me here today. I know some of this probably wasn't easy to hear, but I hope it helped you look at yourself, look at where you are in terms of how you're working on these things, and also noticing these struggles in other people so that you can have more compassion and understanding for what's going on for them. Remember, if you need any support in any of these areas, check out the links in the show notes. There's support there. There's the Facebook group. There's courses, and there's one-on-one support from me if you need it. All right, so pay it forward. Keep focusing on you, and I'll see you next time.
We hope you took away some useful insights and tools you can begin using right away. If you did, please leave a positive review and share on your social media. Because could you imagine if everyone in your life really got it together? Remember, own it now, so you can really own it later.